So Ravens flock, we are a few days removed from the high that was the NFL draft, and we have to get back to being a little more realistic with how we view the team and what the team is and not what we want it to be. Even though we could still be optimistic, we still have to address certain things. And I wanted to do a quick video talking about who I believe are the winners and the losers on the Baltimore Ravens team post draft. The first person I wanted to start with, and it's not even a player, this is a coach. I think the first winner on the team is Zach Orr. Now, as we know, Zach Orr, he's coming off of a bad year, in my opinion. He was a rookie defensive coordinator. He wasn't good. I tried not to slander him too much last season because he was a rookie coordinator, but at the end of the day, he wasn't good. That's just the reality of the situation. Our defense sucked. It was very bad. It was embarrassing. And even towards the end of the year, once we got better, once our defense improved, I don't even know how much of that we should really take seriously, because at the end of the day, that's when we played, towards the end of the year, that's when we played the weakest opponents on our entire schedule. So how seriously should we take that defense? Especially once we get to the playoffs, despite us allegedly having a great run defense, we can't stop Josh Allen and what's dude name? James Jones. We can't stop them to save our lives. I believe that Zach Orr is a major winner post-draft because we drafted Malachi Starks and Mike Green with our first two picks. If Malachi and Mike are who we think they are, if Malachi and Mike are who Ravens fans and NFL fans and draft enthusiasts think he is or think they are, then that should be a major win for Zach. It should be even easier to run this defense because you have two more stars, two more starters, two more potential game-changing, game-wrecking players on your roster now. We may finally have, for the first time since like Terrell Suggs or whatever, we might finally have a go-getter edge rusher. We might have that franchise edge rusher who doesn't need a scheme to get a sack. He doesn't need a bunch of time to be wasted in the pocket with a quarterback has nobody to throw to because it's such good coverage, and then he gets a coverage sack. If Mike Green is who we think he is, he doesn't need any of that. He just needs to line up and put his hand in the dirt, and next thing you know, it's game over. It's a disaster for the opposing team. And if Malachi Starks, of course, if he's as good as advertised, then that means we should have a better secondary next season. We had a bad one last season. Of course, a big part of that was Marcus Williams, but also Kyle Hamilton himself didn't play well, in my opinion, during the early part of the season. So hopefully these two guys will ball out and live up to their potential. And if they do, I think that's a major win for Zach Orr and a major win for how he will run and call the plays on this defense. The next winner, I believe, on the Baltimore Ravens post-draft is the wide receiver room. Now, the reason I say that is because they're probably going to already have in their mind penciled in how many targets they're going to get and how hard they're going to go to make the most of those targets. The reason I say that is because we didn't spend an early draft pick on receiver. We drafted one receiver in this draft. It was LeJohntay Western. We got him out of Colorado. He's a good receiver. He was productive in college, but realistically, he's probably going to be just mainly a guy they use for special teams his first year. So I would imagine the wide receivers, whether it's Zay, Bateman, D-Hop, even though he's old, Tyler Wallace, I imagine that they're a little more comfortable knowing that there's not a chance that their targets are going to drop significantly compared to if we had drafted a guy like, if we had traded up to get Matthew Golden, or if we had drafted Jaden Higgins, right? I think if we had gotten one of those guys early, it might have been a different conversation. They might get less targets, and that might frustrate them. They may not want to say it because everybody wants to seem like a team player, but these guys are still competitors at the end of the day. So I think it's a win for the entire wide receiver room as far as them being able to maintain whatever target share they're going to get this year. And will that mean they do make the most of those targets? I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I don't know. Hopefully they do, though. And I'm just going to stay optimistic about that. But the next winner, I think, is Kyle Hamilton. If Malachi Starks is who everybody thinks he is, then I believe that should allow for Kyle Hamilton to have a bounce back season. And I know Kyle Hamilton was still a Pro Bowl player last year, so me saying bounce back season sounds kind of ridiculous. But I don't think Kyle really played up to his standard last year. That may be just my opinion. That's fine. But many Ravens fans, they love it when Kyle is close to the line of scrimmage. They believe that's when Kyle is at his best. And having a guy like Malachi who could be a really reliable free safety who can make plays and play better than Marcus Williams played last year, I imagine that would allow Kyle to also be a little more free and, get back to being a very disruptive player. Now I wanted to switch over and talk about who I believe are a few people who are losers post-draft on the Ravens. The number one person I wanted to talk about is David Ojabo, and I think it should be pretty self-explanatory. At this point, I think it's pretty safe to say that David is a bust, or he's on the fringe of being a bust. He's a guy who we drafted in the second round. He had some potential, but clearly he's never lived up to it. A combination of injuries, and then even when he's on the field, he's just a non-factor in my opinion. I think David Ojabo is somebody who's at serious risk this offseason of being cut, especially now that they drafted a guy like Mike Green, who they believe can be their franchise edge rusher, can be that dominant force who can get it no matter what. That, I imagine, would push David further down the depth chart because, again, they still have Odafe Oweh, who's coming off of his best season. They still have Kyle Van Noy, who's coming off of his best season. They still have a guy like Tavius Robinson, who in the past 2 seasons has really come into his own and had more and more impact. Even though he's not a big-time player, he deserves more snaps than David. And then they don't know what they have in Adisa Isaac, so they may just say, hey, you know what? We got potentially we potentially could be 4 or 5 deep at edge rusher. We could afford to let David go, and if we need somebody else, just go get somebody else off the street. So the next person I think could potentially be a loser in this offseason post-draft is Odafe Oweh. And it's not for the same reason of David Ojabo. Odafe has actually performed. He's actually played fairly well. He just never lived up to the draft expectations, which, again, that's not all his fault. That's really Eric DeCosta's fault for reaching in the first round and sacrificing our starting swing tackle Orlando Brown Jr. He literally sacrificed our offensive line to get Odafe Oweh in the first place, and I believe that kind of left a bad taste in a lot of Ravens fans' mouths. And even though he didn't live up to the hype he initially had due to his measurables, he's still a pretty solid player, but pretty solid may not be enough to get paid here, honestly. We have great players on the roster who the Ravens either didn't pay or dragged their feet when it came to paying them. So I believe Odafe, even if Odafe balls out and has like 12 to 15 sacks, I think there's still a strong possibility that Odafe still ends up not getting paid here and ends up walking this offseason. Especially if you're the Ravens and you're trying to save money because you guys always overpay somebody and then you're in a bad spot where you don't have a lot of cap space. They may look at Odafe and say, hey, even though he eventually came into his own, we could just run with Mike Green. He's on a rookie contract. He's better and more dominant. And then we still got Tavius Robinson, who plays the run just as good, just as well as Odafe. And they may look at that and say, well, it's not worth it to pay him. So I think that could potentially make Odafe a loser in this situation post-draft. Another loser, in my opinion, is Jalyn Armour-Davis. I think he's a loser in this equation because he's in a bad spot where he's essentially been hurt nonstop. Like, I don't even know if I know what Jalyn Armour-Davis looks like. I don't even know his jersey number. Like, it's been like, I don't even know how many years at this point. And I don't even really know his jersey number. Like, that's how rare it is to see JAD on the field. So I do believe he could very well get cut this offseason, especially with them drafting 2 corners. Maybe they take a chance and roster one of those corners and then just cut JAD. Or maybe they just go get another veteran like Stephon Gilmore and let Jalyn Armour-Davis walk. The final loser I wanted to talk about is the entire Ravens offensive line. And when I say that, I'm not saying that every Ravens player on the offensive line is bad. But what I'm saying is the offensive line as a unit, in my opinion, is losing because John Harbaugh very well could sabotage this offensive line just because he's stubborn and wants to be right every time, because he wants to feel like he's the smartest in the room. Reason I say that is because even though we drafted Emory Jones and even though we drafted Garrett Dillinger, there's no guarantee that there's going to be a fair competition at the guard position. We don't know. We honestly don't know. We sat here last year and saw John Harbaugh with a straight face. This man looked at us in the camera and said Ben Cleveland got beat out, got flat out beat out, whatever he said. He got beat out flat out by Daniel Faalele with a straight face. He looked at all of us end of the bar people with a straight face and told us this nonsense. I don't care what that Pro Bowl. So to me, that Pro Bowl lost all meaning. I think it did. It has zero meaning at this point. It means very little, especially when we see him on the field. He's not outplaying these guys. You've seen that on the rare occasions where we saw guys like Josh Jones or Ben Cleveland, they looked solid. Even if they didn't look like superstars, they looked more competent than Faalele. But at the end of the day, Harbaugh was unwilling to give them a legitimate chance. So what are the odds that he gives Emory Jones a legitimate chance? I want him to, because I do believe that Emory Jones, if all things are fair, I think even as a rookie, Emory as a rookie can still beat out Daniel Faalele for the starting spot at the guard position. And who knows, Garrett Dillinger may even be able to compete with our other 7th round pick, Andrew Voorhees, for the left guard position, if all things are fair. But how could we guarantee that Harbaugh is going to let things be fair and not let his bias get into it? This is why I wanted us to draft Gray Zabel. This is why I wanted us to move up to get a guy like Gray Zabel. Not just because he's very talented, but also because if you use that type of draft capital and then try to tell us some nonsense about how he's not good enough and Faalele beat him, the Ravens flock would go crazy because they would know that's complete nonsense. But once you get to players who are drafted in like the 3rd round or later, that allows for fans to care about them a whole lot less, which I believe is the main reason why when John Harbaugh comes out here and says this nonsense about how Faalele is beating people flat out for the spot, and they're trying to make it seem like these guys are better than what they are, that concerns me, because that makes me wonder, are they willing to sacrifice this offensive line all in the name of being stubborn? They could be. John Harbaugh could be willing to, unfortunately. And that's why I think the offensive line could potentially be losers post-draft, because we don't know if we're going to see the most maximized version of this offensive line. What if the best version of this offensive line ends up being Ronnie Stanley, Garrett Dillinger, Tyler Linderbaum, Emory Jones Jr., and Roger Rosengarten? Is Harbaugh going to be willing to bench Faalele and Voorhees? I don't know.